Happening now, breaking news, happy to testify. Former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski says he will happily come before the House Judiciary Committee. Will his story convince lawmakers or the public that President Trump didn't try to obstruct justice during the Mueller investigation? Or will it convince Democrats the president ought to be impeached? Not going home. Israel reverses course and agrees to let Representative Rashida Tlaib visit her grandmother in her family's ancestral home in the West Bank. But the Congresswoman turns down the offer, and now she's slamming the restrictions she would have had to follow if she went. It started a new round of angry finger-pointing. Love me or hate me. Amid reports President Trump is worried about the economy and a possible recession, he comes up with a creative new argument, telling a crowd that love him or hate him, everyone has to vote for him because the economy will crash and wipe out their retirement savings if he loses. Walking away. We're learning frightening new details about the plane crash that retired NASCAR driver Dale Earnhardt Jr. walked away from with only minor injuries, including that the plane bounced twice before running off the runway. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news this afternoon. President Trump's former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, said he's happy to come testify before the House Judiciary Committee. Democrats want to ask him about the section of the Mueller report that raises questions about whether President Trump obstructed justice. Lewandowski says he will explain why there was no obstruction and no collusion. Also tonight, there's fresh fallout from Israel's decision at President Trump's urging to deny permission for two Democratic congresswomen to visit the country. An Israeli official lifted the ban for one of the lawmakers, Michigan's Rashida Tlaib, who wanted to visit her grandmother in the West Bank. But the congresswoman turned down the offer because it came with conditions she refuses to accept. Also tonight, we're hearing the president is frustrated and, by some reports, rattled over signs the U.S. economy may be headed for a recession. At a rally last night, he raised the specter of a market crash, wiping out people's retirement savings if he loses the election, telling the crowd, and I'm quoting him now, love me or hate me, you've got to vote for me. I'll get reaction from Democratic Representative Raja Krishnamurthy of the Intelligence and Oversight Committees, and our correspondents and analysts will have full coverage of the day's top stories. Let's start with our congressional reporter, Phil Mattingly, in the breaking news. Phil, what is Corey Lewandowski saying about testifying before the Judiciary Committee?
Well, for months, House Democrats have tried and mostly failed to get some of President Trump's top advisors, closest officials in his orbit, to come to Capitol Hill and testify publicly or behind closed doors. That is about involved in some of the central issues that the Judiciary Committee is investigating in their effort to do potential impeachment. It's also worth noting he was on Air Force One with President Trump last night as President Trump went to New Hampshire. He is currently, Wolf, considering a run for the New Hampshire Senate.
So what else potentially could Corey Lewandowski say in an open session before the House Judiciary Committee that could raise further questions about possible obstruction?
Yeah, this is a central witness for Democrats, and the reason why you just go into the Mueller report. There are two specific instances in the Mueller report where Corey Lewandowski is cited specifically. He spoke to the special counsel, and I want to read one passage in particular to you where it says, quote, on June 19th, 2017, the president met one-on-one in the Oval Office with his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, a trusted advisor outside the government, and dictated a message for Lewandowski to deliver to then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The message said that Sessions should publicly announce that notwithstanding his recusal from the Russia investigation, the investigation was, quote, very unfair to the president, and the president had done nothing wrong, and Sessions planned to meet with the special counsel and let him move forward with investigating election meddling in the future elections. Now, Wolf, when you talk to Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, they've made two things clear. One, in the obstruction piece, this is one of the key elements, the idea of President Trump trying to stand in the way, get rid of, or undercut in one way or another the special counsel. And the other is that Corey Lewandowski has been a key target for them in this investigation, not just because of these instances in the Mueller report, but because, in particular, he has not served in the White House. Many of the reasons that they've been able to block so many many advisors is on executive privilege grounds. Because Corey Lewandowski never served in the White House, they believe that they could not utilize that. Now, Caitlin Collins, our colleague, reported yesterday the White House had been considering trying to figure out if they could use some executive privilege here. But at least at this point in time, Corey Lewandowski says on September 17th, he plans on attending the House Judiciary Committee.
He's very open. He's saying in this interview he's got nothing to hide. There's no collusion, no obstruction. The last time he testified behind closed doors before one of these congressional committees, Democrats were asking questions and he was refusing to answer questions. There are some Democrats who are concerned this could become a circus.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big concerns. The times that he has spoken to Democrats in the committees, it's been behind closed doors. At one point he said, I'm, quote, not answering your bleeping questions. And the idea that there's also politics involved in this, that he's considering a Senate race right now against a Democratic incumbent, that he is such an ardent defender of the president, even what he said in the Fox News interview about it being a witch hunt. He called the Democratic members of the committee phonies, that the potential for this to turn into a political circus, to turn into a platform for Corey Lewandowski is something that people could be nervous about. But the reality is this: he is such a central component to what Democrats on that committee are trying to do. And keep in mind, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler made very clear they are in the middle of an impeachment investigation and they are considering articles of impeachment by the end of this year. And Corey Lewandowski and his involvement in this specific issue in the Mueller report is a key piece of that, Wolf.
Let's not forget, as you point out, he's thinking of running for the Senate from New Hampshire. All right, Phil, thank you very much. Let's go to see. That's Caitlin Collins. She's been traveling with the president. She's in New Jersey outside his resort over there. Caitlin, is there any reaction so far from the White House to what we just heard about Corey Lewandowski?
Well, Wolf, Corey Lewandowski being open to testifying could signal that the White House is optimistic that that strategy of potentially invoking executive privilege so he doesn't have to answer questions about conversations he's had with President Trump could be a successful one, even though he's never worked in the White House. And Democrats and executive privilege experts say absolutely not. That is not something you can do. White House officials are still figuring out how to proceed with this, as others and their colleagues are dealing with the fallout after the president urged Israel to not let those two Democratic congresswomen that he's been feuding with for weeks enter the country, even though Israel relented today under certain circumstances for one of those women. She says her travel plans have changed. Tonight, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is rejecting Israel's offer to visit her family on the West Bank, an offer that came with conditions one day after the country denied her and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar entry at President Trump's urging. Visiting my grandmother under these oppressive conditions stands against everything I believe in, Tlaib explained on Twitter. Those conditions would have included a pledge not to promote boycotts against Israel while she was there. The president has faced widespread criticism for getting involved.
It's disrespect for the Congress and the American political system for our ally to keep two members of Congress out of Israel.
But sources tell CNN the president's advisors believe his fight with four freshman Democrats who call themselves the Squad could benefit him in 2020, which is why the president keeps hammering them on the campaign trail.
It really is keep America great, because we have these socialists who want to take it away from us.
The one message sources tell CNN advisors fear won't work out for him is the economy. Shaky markets and unpredictable trade talks are stoking fears of a recession inside the White House. At a campaign rally overnight in New Hampshire, the president struck a dire tone.
You have no choice but to vote for me, because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me.
With re-election on his mind, Trump now finds himself defending the very policies that are rattling investors.
And we're imposing beautiful, well-placed tariffs.
Even admitting that his trade war with China may not end quickly.
I never said China was going to be easy.
Something he actually did say just last year when the president noted that trade wars are easy. Amid the long-running trade war between Washington and Beijing, the Trump administration is moving ahead tonight with an $8 billion sale of F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan, a move virtually guaranteed to anger the Chinese at a time when officials are trying to get trade talks back on track. Earlier today, the president met with his national security team at his New Jersey golf resort for a briefing on the state of U.S. Taliban peace negotiations, talks that could end America's longest-running war. The U.S. still has roughly 14,000 troops in Afghanistan, and Trump has been adamant that he wants them out soon. In the meanwhile, CNN has learned the president was forced to make an awkward phone call from Air Force One after he mocked the weight of a person he thought was a protester at his rally.
That guy's got a serious weight problem. Go home, start exercising. Now he goes home and his mom says, "What the hell have you just done?"
But it was Trump who was left wondering what he had done after it was revealed the man he mocked was actually one of his supporters. A White House official telling CNN Trump did not apologize, but left the man a voicemail thanking him for his support. That supporter, Frank Dawson, said there are no hard feelings over the mix-up.
Everything's good. I love the guy. He's the best thing that ever happened in this country.
Now, Wolf, the president has a habit of mocking protesters at these rallies, but of course he doesn't typically go after his own supporters. Once aides realized the mix-up, they went to Frank Dawson, got his information so the president could later call him. But they did stress today, the president did not say the words, "I'm sorry" or "I apologize." He only thanked the man for his support. Wolf.
All right, Caitlin, good reporting. Thank you very much. Joining us now, Democratic Representative Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois. He's a member of both the Oversight and Intelligence Committees. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Let me quickly get your reaction to the breaking news that Corey Lewandowski now says he will testify before the House Judiciary Committee, and he will insist there was no collusion, no obstruction. But if he's uncooperative with your colleagues, refuses to answer questions, how useful will his testimony be?
Well, I think that there are two things that come to mind. One is he's going to be testifying under oath. And so he's got to be very careful in what he says, because obviously there was evidence to support what Special Counsel Mueller said about what he recounted in his conversations with President Trump. And then secondly, there is no executive privilege governing those conversations. He's not a member of the White House or the executive administration. And so I think that he would be subject to potentially a subpoena for directly answering certain questions if he refused.
The Mueller report, as you know, outlined Lewandowski's role in what's described as potential obstruction of justice. You don't support a formal impeachment inquiry, at least not yet. Could his testimony impact your stance on that? Possibly.
I'd like to hear what he said about his conversations with the president, and the president basically telling him to instruct Jeff Sessions to do something that he wasn't supposed to be doing. I think that the more we learn about those conversations, the better.
Another sensitive issue I want to get to, you're following, all of us are following Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's decision not to visit Israel and the West Bank after Israel put certain conditions on her visit. What do you make of these late developments?
Well, first of all, I thought that it was outrageous for the president to inject domestic politics into this relationship that we have with Israel that has largely been a bipartisan one for decades. I was very disappointed. I thought it was a serious mistake on the part of the Israeli government to acquiesce to his particular request. And I think it's logical that Congresswoman Tlaib would not want to go to Israel under any conditions that would be put on what she could say and do while she was there, given that no such conditions have ever been imposed on other members of Congress. I think the larger point here, Wolf, is that the president is disrespecting Congress in his actions. And while we may not share these the viewpoints of these particular members of Congress, we very much believe that members of Congress should be able to conduct oversight, should be able to travel unimpeded by the president.
Yeah, it's a widely held view here in Washington, not only by Democrats, but even a whole bunch of Republicans as well. They're very disappointed in these late developments. Congressman Krishnamurthy, as usual, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, Wolf, thank you.
Up next, why has President Trump been asking about the possibility of the United States buying Greenland? Also, investigators say the plane carrying NASCAR legend Dale Earnhardt Jr. and his family. Corey Lewandowski was the campaign manager says he's willing to appear before a House committee conducting a potential impeachment investigation into the president. Let's bring in our legal and political experts for some analysis. And Jackie, Corey Lewandowski says he would be, quote, happy to testify before Congress, but some Democrats already fear if he refuses to answer a bunch of questions, this could turn out to be a circus.
Yeah, completely, 100%. I mean, there's a reason why Corey Lewandowski has remained in the president's good graces, and that's because he is a reliable surrogate for the president, extolling praise on him at every single turn, regardless of the way the president has treated Corey. But it does seem like there could potentially be some sort of quid pro quo here. Corey is going to be appearing before this hearing saying that he has nothing to say but positive things, that there's no obstruction of justice. This is a witch hunt, things he said in the past. As your correspondent Phil Mattingly just said, told investigators behind closed doors that, he wasn't going to answer that bleeping question. And, he is potentially announcing his run for Senate in New Hampshire, a state that the Trump campaign is really focused on. So, obviously he can't lie before Congress. That would be in violation of the law, but I doubt that Corey will say anything that's going to be damaging or negative of him. And I think we could even see potentially a Senate campaign ad cut from this appearance. Because
you heard the president last night at that rally in New Hampshire basically endorsed Corey Lewandowski.
Exactly.
And one of the points he made, or maybe the first point he made, was he's great on TV.
Which is like the most important thing to this president.
Yeah, that's what he was telling people in New Hampshire. He had a huge crowd there.
Hasn't worked out so well for him today.
At that rally, Sam, the Mueller report lays out some specifics about potential obstruction of justice, including the president asking Lewandowski to pressure then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to rein in the special counsel's investigation. That's a significant point that members of the House Judiciary Committee will press him on.
Exactly. And let's remember, Lewandowski is in a different category than other folks that have been subpoenaed by House Judiciary. He will not, most likely, be able to claim executive privilege based upon the fact that he hasn't worked at the White House. He has been an outside advisor. And one of the key issues for the committee when they question Lewandowski gets to intent. Because Lewandowski was present with the president when he did things like try to pressure Sessions to end this investigation, to try to do a deal to only investigate future election cycles, Lewandowski can, if he's testifying honestly, speak to whether the president knew what he was doing, had knowledge of whether he would be breaking the law by trying to obstruct justice, and again, get back to this question of intent. That makes the House Judiciary Committee's questions and what they really focus on all the more important.
Since he never worked in the White House, worked in the government, he was a campaign manager. If the White House decided they wanted to assert executive privilege, would they have a legal case?
It does not appear so, but that doesn't mean they won't try it anyway. So what's executive privilege? Look, privileges are very important. They're important because you want candid advice, right? You want, say, for example, attorney-client privilege. You want, when you sit down with a client, for them to tell you everything and for you not to repeat that. Otherwise, they will not give you their best. So relate it, and by analogy, to the president. Someone comes in the executive office. You want them. There's an advisor. There's another government official. You want to have a conversation that will not be front page news. As a result of that, executive privilege is something that's very important. However, the issue applies to people working in the government to protect the internal deliberative process of the government. When you're talking, back to your original question, about someone who was an informal advisor and not a government official, then the privilege does not apply. And so, again, the president will obstruct in terms that he does obstruct, that is, not have anyone go to Congress, Don McGahn, executive privilege, Hope Hicks, executive privilege. It will not work with Corey Lewandowski.
All right, everybody stand by. April, stand by. I want to take a quick break. There's a lot more we need to discuss. Let's get back to our political experts. April, as the markets are showing some signs, potential signs of trouble, bit wobbly right now. There's some economists are suggesting there could be a recession. The president seemed to try out a new campaign theme at his political rally in New Hampshire last night. Listen to this.
You have no choice but to vote for me, because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me.
All right, what do you make of that argument?
Well, Wolf, this kind of goes along with the line of when the president was running for president the first time, asking the black community, what do you have to lose? The CBC came out, I have show and tell, the CBC came out with this saying, we have a lot to lose. Basically, this premise of the president, you just need to vote for me because you need to vote for me, it doesn't wash. Particularly when this is a president who had a temper tantrum over a wall and shut the government down to the angst and the chagrin of government employees, those companies and businesses that worked around employees, the government offices, and the GDP didn't move. Those in rural America are hurting right now because of the tariffs. You have the clothing industry. We're possibly going into a recession with the Dow dropping. The president says anything out of his mouth and it affects the markets. People need to use critical thinking. It's not just vote for me because I'm entertaining. Politics is personal. And if your pocket, and you go in your pocket and you pull it out and there's lint, that's going to show up at the polls.
Jackie, what do you make of his point? Love me or hate me, you've got to vote for me.
Well, we've at the Post been reporting just how worried people inside the White House are about the volatility of the markets and potentially dropping into a recession. And Trump's comment last night actually runs counter to exactly the effect that a recession would have on his reelect, which is that it would undercut his incumbent advantage. As we've seen with a lot of his supporters who have been repelled by his language and a lot of the more inflammatory remarks he's made in his presidency, they've excused that because of the economy and the upswing it's been on since Trump's taken office, largely due to a lot of the work that Obama did. But that being said, this would hurt the president. And if this is really the only excuse that he can come back to convince his voters why they should continue to allow his tweets, his rhetoric, his trade war to continue this kind of market volatility, I think they're going to have to do a better job of convincing voters otherwise.
Everybody stand by. There's other important news we're following. The president's reported interest in buying Greenland is being met with a chilly reception in the island territory. Our senior international correspondent, Fred Pleitgen, is in the southeastern part of Greenland. He's got more. Fred, what are you hearing?
Hi there, Wolf. Well, the people here in southeastern Greenland really seem to be almost mocking President Trump's idea to possibly buy or acquire Greenland. This country's government has said, quote, that Greenland is not for sale. And folks that we've been speaking to have said, look, this is something that the U.S. has tried in the past. They talk about 1867 and the period shortly after World War II. And one resident said it's simply not going to happen. Now, on the face of it, it might not be such a crazy idea for the United States to want Greenland. This place is apparently very rich in natural resources. And what's been going on in the past couple of years is that Chinese companies have been trying to move in and exploit those resources. And that's, of course, something that the U.S. is not very fond of. This place is also strategically extremely important. America has a big military base here and even an early warning system for ballistic missiles. So it is something that on the face of it would make sense. But of course, if Greenland does have all these natural resources, if they manage to exploit them, the first thing they'll want to do is they'll want full independence. Right now, they're still semi-autonomous. They're still part of Denmark. So before wanting to become part of the United States, it's possible they would rather become independent. One thing President Trump would probably have to do is finally acknowledge that the global climate crisis is real. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of icebergs that are currently breaking off glaciers here, as this was one of the warmest summers in this country's history. Wolf?
Very interesting. Fred Pleitgen, thank you very much on the scene for us in Greenland. Samantha, from a national security standpoint, how important is Greenland?
Well, it depends who you ask, President Trump or actual national security experts. From a national security perspective, well, there is a reason why we have a military base in Greenland. It's our northernmost base and provides us critical access when it comes to countering countries like Russia and defending against missiles and other kinds of movements in that region. From President Trump's perspective, it is an area rich in natural resources. And what we're seeing right now is a new Cold War in a very cold region of the world, the Arctic. And that is why this is the time that we should be working with Greenland. We should be working with Denmark on countering Chinese and Russian influence in the region as allies, rather than embarking on potentially looking at a real estate purchase. And final point, Wolf, President Trump can't or is unwilling to maintain the territorial and integrity of the United States. The territory is currently under his control. now is not the time to be looking to add more to that.
Well, he likes real estate, as we all know. You know, Joey, what do you think? Because the government of Greenland, they actually reacted today by saying Greenland is not for sale.
Well, look, the reality is that everything has a price, right? And so it should be noted by way of history that apparently this was explored in 1946, I believe, under Truman. Didn't go anywhere, but it did happen. And then by way of historical significance, too, remember the Louisiana Purchase happened 1803, right, as it related to France. In addition to that, we also have Russian Purchase, right, or at least Alaska Purchase from Russia, I think, in 1867. So there's some precedent for this to occur. Times have changed. It doesn't happen, but it's not as crazy as you might think at first blush.
Well, let me ask April, what do you think? Because you're smiling. You seem to be laughing about the whole thing.
Yes, because we're being very cerebral about this. Sources close to the president have told me that behind his back they were laughing because this was not well thought out at all.
I know he did ask his advisors to give him a legal review. Is it even theoretically possible?
Yeah, and I think that what is important here is that, you know, one advisor weighed in and said that the president hasn't brought this up in a campaign rally, which would be probably a talking point that would receive a lot of applause, which shows that he might not actually be serious about this. But I think Ed in Greenland actually made a really good point, which is that if he was going to be seriously considering buying this, he probably would be well served to admit that climate change does exist and is currently rapidly melting the region.
But come on, I mean, President Trump has been cutting funding for military bases and other alliances. This is what he's been saving up for. I mean, this is kind of like a give me a break moment, right? I mean, we are literally throwing allies under the bus, and he is wasting time and wasting his lawyers' time and others looking at whether it's legally possible to purchase a territory from our ally Denmark. Why doesn't he spend the time sitting down with Denmark, sitting down with Greenland, and talking about actual national security interests rather than wasting time?
Well, April, Denmark actually said what Greenland is saying, it's not for sale.
You know, I'm going to go back to what Joy says. If the right price is there, it could be. But, you know, again, this president throws everything out there just to throw something at the wall to see if it sticks. And we're doing a lot of talking, and this president really is not seriously thinking as much about this as we are. So it's going to be on to the next subject. He might want to buy Paris the next day. Who knows? So it's just, I hate to say that, but I mean,
I don't
you
know,
have to laugh
Paris
to keep
isn't
from
what
crying.
It used to be, according to the president.
All right now.
Hi, guys. I love Paris in the springtime. Everybody stand by. There's a lot more news we're following. Authorities say NASCAR star Dale Earnhardt Jr. and others are extremely lucky after walking away from a horrific plane crash. We're going to bring you the latest on the investigation. Plus, more provocation from North Korea in the form of missile tests. Is Kim Jong-un also testing the limits of President Trump's patience? North Korea launched more short-range missiles early today, continuing a series of military and diplomatic provocations. Let's get the latest from CNN's Brian Todd. Brian, what is Kim Jong-un up to?
Wolf, tonight the dictator is moving very aggressively, fine-tuning his short-range missiles for quick strike capability against the U.S. and South Korean forces. And he's using those missiles as a diplomatic sledgehammer to get what he wants from the U.S. and its allies. After 2 more launches overnight, sending ballistic missiles flying at 6 times the speed of sound toward the Sea of Japan, North Korea's aggressive young leader appears to once again be trying to dictate terms to the U.S. and South Korea from the tip of his spear. The test firing of 2 short-range missiles late Thursday is Kim Jong-un's 6th such provocation in only about 3 weeks. Analysts say he's again clamoring for President Trump's attention, but also signaling his rage.
The message is that as long as U.S.-South Korea exercises continue, North Korea is going to continue to develop, deploy, and test some new capabilities that can do damage to the United States, to our troops, to our bases, and to South Korea.
Those precision joint military exercises between U.S. and South Korean forces started a few weeks ago and will be conducted at least into next week. U.S. officials have repeatedly said they're defensive, designed to sharpen American troops' readiness for any possible hostilities on the peninsula. But the drills have always made the young, self-declared supreme commander of North Korea's military uneasy.
His rhetoric calls these preparations for invasion and to strike against him, particularly the purchase of the F-35 by South Korea gives it the capability to strike deep and to strike any leadership target or any missile target in North Korea. So he is afraid of this training.
At the same time tonight, Kim is firing another diplomatic salvo at his South Korean counterpart, Moon Jae-in. Kim's regime saying it has no desire to talk face-to-face with South Korean officials again. This comes as President Trump, according to sources in the administration, has soured on Moon, believing he hasn't done enough to rein in North Korea's aggression. Some observers believe Moon's getting a bad rap. It was Moon, after all, who spurred a lot of momentum for the peace process early on, hosting Kim Jong-un's sister at the Winter Olympics and having an aide hand-deliver Kim's first request for a summit to President Trump. But analysts say the dictator in Pyongyang is conveniently forgetting all of that for his own gain.
Kim Jong-un really is trying to delegitimize Moon Jae-in, to undercut his political power in South Korea, and most importantly, to drive a wedge between the South Korean and U.S. alliance.
Tonight, veteran diplomats are warning the president of the dangers of investing too much in his personal one-on-one relationship with a dictator who they believe wants to keep his nuclear weapons.
Indeed, he does not intend to denuclearize. So one of the central dangers is the danger of what I call self-delusion, that the president may convince himself that something is happening that is not really happening.
And to give an idea of just how much the U.S. and South Korea have bent over backwards to tolerate Kim's provocations and to work toward peace, analysts point out that since that first Trump-Kim summit in Singapore in June of last year, the U.S. and its allies in the region have canceled at least 12 sets of military exercises, and they've scaled back many others. While at the same time, Kim Jong-un has not scaled back any of North Korea's military exercises one bit.
Very interesting, Brian. There's also real concern about the immediate threat, the so-called short-range missiles, which have a range of about 600 miles, that Kim has been testing, posed to U.S. and South Korean forces who are they're not very far away.
They really are not, Wolf. It's a huge threat. Analysts say these latest missiles that Kim has tested, well, they've demonstrated a very serious improvement in North Korea's missile program. One expert from MIT says these latest missiles Kim has tested are very impressive, given their trajectory, their ability to maneuver in flight, all of which makes them harder for U.S. missile defenses to strike. It is a huge threat tonight.
Seriously, it seriously is. All right, Brian Todd reporting. Thank you. Coming up, we'll have more on the breaking news. The former Trump campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, says he's happy to come testify in open session before the House. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. Manu, Corey Lewandowski is speaking out about that House subpoena to testify.
Yeah, no question about it, Wolf. And he's making it very clear that he is going to defend the president and attack the Democrats on that committee, calling them phonies, saying that he's going to make this clear that the Democrats are engaged in what he calls a witch hunt. Now, this represents, Wolf, a new phase of this investigation that the House Judiciary Committee is launching as they try to determine whether or not to move forward with formal impeachment proceedings. Particularly, the Judiciary Committee chairman has already said they're in a formal impeachment proceeding. The question now is, will they actually vote on articles of impeachment? And they view, the Democrats do, Lewandowski as one of the witnesses who could help build their case towards an actual articles of impeachment. The question ultimately is, how much does Lewandowski tell this committee? He has appeared before a separate committee, the House Intelligence Committee, back last year. And in that session, Democrats tried to ask him a number of questions about what happened during the White House. He did not serve in the White House, but communications that he had with the president, but he refused to answer those questions, even cursing repeatedly, I'm told, at those Democrats. Now, will he fight and be feisty before Democrats in this committee? He indicated today he's willing to fight.
I look forward to my opportunity to sit in front of his committee, and believe me, I'm no flowering violet. He wants to attack me, which he's already done. I am a guy who's going to fight back, and I look forward to that opportunity. I'm happy to come, right? Because I want to explain that there was no collusion. There was no obstruction.
Now, Wolf, Corey Lewandowski is considering a run for the Senate. Presumably, he could use this as an effort to propel his campaign, potentially. He appeared with the president at his rally yesterday. The president made very clear he would like him to run for that in that New Hampshire Senate race, even though a number of Republicans are concerned about his potential candidacy. So we could see a lot of theatrics come this hearing in mid-September, the question is ultimately what will be gained, what will the public learn? That's a big question going forward.
It could be rather lively. What does he know about possible obstruction?
Well, he has referenced several times throughout the Mueller report as part of that investigation into obstruction of justice. There was efforts about allegedly that the president underwent to try to undercut the Mueller probe, try to thwart it. And according to what the Mueller report said is that the president told Corey Lewandowski that he wanted Lewandowski to reach out to Jeff Sessions, then the attorney general, to try to limit the scope of the Mueller probe to exclude the president's campaign and instead focus on future investigations. Now, Lewandowski tried to set up this meeting. It did not occur. The president then followed up with Lewandowski. Lewandowski then turned to Rick Dearborn, who was then a White House official, then a former chief of staff to Jeff Sessions, said, why don't you go to Jeff Sessions, try to set up this meeting? He delivered a message. It was typed out, delivering the president's words. Dearborn apparently did not set up this meeting, but the same committee, the House Judiciary Committee, wants to hear from Rick Dearborn as well. They issued a subpoena for both him and Lewandowski to appear at that hearing in mid-September. So we'll see if Corey Lewandowski decides to talk about those episodes, because in the past, as I said earlier, he has not wanted to do that before.
And as you point out, unlike Lewandowski, Dearborn actually worked in the White House, so the White House might have a better case for executive privilege on that front. Thanks very much, Manu, for that report. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. She's with the president in New Jersey. Caitlin, any White House reaction so far to the prospect of Corey Lewandowski testifying?
Well, Wolf, it seems to be a sign the White House thinks that strategy we first reported on yesterday could be a successful one, where officials are weighing using executive privilege to stop Corey Lewandowski from having to answer questions about conversations like the ones that Manu was just laying out, conversations about the special counsel's investigation, even though Democrats have said absolutely not. That's not something that can apply to Corey Lewandowski because he never worked in the administration, something we should note. Executive privilege experts that I spoke to agree with. White House counsel officials are still trying to figure out how to navigate their path forward with Corey Lewandowski and this congressional subpoena as their colleagues are dealing with the fallout after President Trump urged Israel to bar those two Democratic congresswomen from being able to visit the country. And even though Israel relented today, allowing one of them to come under certain circumstances to visit her family, Rashida Tlaib says her travel plans have changed. Tonight, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib is rejecting Israel's offer to visit her family on the West Bank, an offer that came with conditions one day after the country denied her and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar entry at President Trump's urging. Visiting my grandmother under these oppressive conditions stands against everything I believe in, Tlaib explained on Twitter. Those conditions would have included a pledge not to promote boycotts against Israel while she was there. The president has faced widespread criticism for getting involved.
It's disrespect for the Congress and the American political system for our ally to keep two members of Congress out of Israel.
But sources tell CNN the president's advisors believe his fight with four freshman Democrats who call themselves the Squad could benefit him in 2020, which is why the president keeps hammering them on the campaign trail.
It really is keep America great, because we have these socialists who want to take it away from us.
The one message sources tell CNN advisors fear won't work out for him is the economy. Shaky markets and unpredictable trade talks are stoking fears of a recession inside the White House. At a campaign rally overnight in New Hampshire, the president struck a dire tone.
You have no choice but to vote for me, because your 401ks, down the tubes, everything's going to be down the tubes. So whether you love me or hate me, you got to vote for me.
With re-election on his mind, Trump now finds himself defending the very policies that are rattling investors.
And we're imposing beautiful, well-placed tariffs.
Even admitting that his trade war with China may not end quickly.
I never said China was going to be easy.
Something he actually did say just last year when the president noted that trade wars are easy. Amid the long-running trade war between Washington and Beijing, the Trump administration is moving ahead tonight with an $8 billion sale of F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan, a move virtually guaranteed to anger the Chinese at a time when officials are trying to get trade talks back on track. Earlier today, the president met with his national security team at his New Jersey golf resort for a briefing on the state of U.S. Taliban peace negotiations, talks that could end America's longest-running war. The U.S. still has roughly 14,000 troops in Afghanistan, and Trump has been adamant that he wants them out soon. In the meanwhile, CNN has learned the president was forced to make an awkward phone call from Air Force One after he mocked the weight of a person he thought was a protester at his rally.
That guy's got a serious weight problem. Go home, start exercising. Now he goes home and his mom says, "What the hell have you just done?"
But it was Trump who was left wondering what he had done after it was revealed the man he mocked was actually one of his supporters. A White House official telling CNN Trump did not apologize, but left the man a voicemail thanking him for his support. That supporter, Frank Dawson, said there are no hard feelings over the mix-up.
Everything's good. I love the guy. He's the best thing that ever happened in this country.
Now, Wolf, the president has been maintaining publicly that the U.S. economy is doing just fine, but behind the scenes, our reporting shows that the president is turning to people he doesn't always listen to, people like his hardline trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who is assuring him that there will be an economic rebound to come and that it will be worth the trade war happening with China.
First, and then we'll get to some of the other issues. Lewandowski says your committee, the Judiciary Committee, didn't even need to subpoena him. He says he's happy to come testify in open session and to fight back, his words, fight back, and to say there was no collusion, no obstruction. What's your reaction to all of this?
Well, the truth of the matter is I think that talk is cheap. If he's willing to do that, come, take a seat at the table, raise your hand, take an oath to tell the truth, and don't try to exert any privilege. Testify openly and honestly about everything that happened while you were on the campaign trail and your actions involving the Mueller investigation and any messages that you were a go-between between President Trump and other officials as the president tried to obstruct justice. So it's one thing to say I look forward to coming, but you know and I know that he's trying to run for the U.S. Senate. And he will do just as everybody else has done, either behind closed doors or in public, exert some form of executive privilege, even when it has no basis. And in Corey Lewandowski's case, it would have no basis for him to exert any sort of privilege. But I would be willing to bet that he will come, he will exert privilege, answer the questions he wants to answer, and not answer those hard questions about what the president did, when, and how.
Yeah, some of your Democratic colleagues already fear this could turn out to be a circus, but we shall see. As you know, the Mueller report outlines how President Trump directed Lewandowski to tell then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation. How important is it to hear his own description of these incidents of what are widely seen as possible obstruction?
Well, look, we outlined in the questioning with Mueller, how each element of obstruction of justice was taking place. And Mr. Lewandowski's actions are one of those instances. The president wanted to limit an investigation into himself for his benefit to keep things from coming out to the public. And so it would be very important for Lewandowski to answer those questions. Did it happen? Did the president direct you to do it? Because there's ample evidence that the president did. So I'm really wondering whether Corey Lewandowski is that in love with the president or the prospect of running for the Senate that he would come before Congress and lie. And so I don't put it past him or anybody else in this administration, but I welcome him to come. But please don't come and talk all of this macho stuff on TV. And as soon as you get to the table, exert privilege when there are questions that you can't answer, don't want to answer, or would implicate the president in clear obstruction of justice.
Congressman, your Judiciary Committee, as you know, is coming back a week early in early September from recess to vote on new gun control measures. Then what? How do you plan to try and convince, for example, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, to even consider these bills, assuming they pass in the House?
Look, we're going to need the help of the American people. And I believe that the will of the American people can overpower obstruction in the Senate by the Senate Majority Leader in terms of bringing bills to the floor for a vote. Assault weapons ban, the high-capacity magazines that hold the ammunition in these assault weapons and semi-automatic weapons. The overwhelming public wants to see that happen. Think about it. We live in a country where we have cities right now that are banning plastic straws, but we can't ban assault weapons. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. And look, I think banning plastic straws will save the environment. I also believe that banning assault weapons will save the lives of many people, children, mothers, sons, fathers, and the list goes on. And we've seen that time and time again. And my grandmother always told me, where there's the will, there's a way. And we need the American people to join with us, especially all of these senators, including Mitch McConnell, who's up for re-election, and let him know that this is our will. And if you stand in the way of it, we will get it done with you or without you.
We heard some Democratic presidential candidates, Congressman, push for either voluntary or even mandatory buyback programs for assault-style weapons. Would you support that?
Look, that's something I would not rule out. These are weapons of mass destruction. We know where they are. They're in our communities, and we need to figure out a way to get those weapons off the street. So if it is a buyback, then I'm all for it. If it's a mandatory buyback, I think you may run into some complications, but the thought of it does not offend me, and it sounds like something I could support. But I will say that we have banned assault weapons in the history of this country, and we should go back to that time. And so we beat the NRA once, and we ought to do it again.
Let me get your thoughts on Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's decision not to visit Israel and the West Bank. She rejected the conditions Israel placed on her trip, saying she won't let her desire to see her elderly grandmother be used as what she calls a political bargaining chip. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I would say good for her for standing up for her principles. And the problem is, Wolf, and you know, I hate to come on your show and just criticize the media a little bit, but we run down every rabbit hole that this president creates. And what he did was outlandish. It was wrong. For him to tell another country not to let members of Congress in that country, when we send that country billions of dollars of aid, she has a congressional responsibility to go and see how the money is spent and to go to Israel, who's been a very strong ally. However, all of his actions come when something bad has happened. The stock market is tanking. People are worried about their 401k. He can't defend his trade war. He can't talk rationally or intelligently about his plan to end the trade war, improve the stock market. So what does he do? He changes the subject by another outlandish act. I think that I support her and her decision. I just wish that Israel would stand up, show some independence, and welcome them in with no conditions attached.
You're certainly not alone in making that point. Congressman Cedric Richmond, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, we got some breaking news coming into the Situation Room right now. A critical U.S. computer system is now down, and it's affecting thousands of Americans and other travelers trying to enter the United States. We're digging in on this. We will have details. Stand by. We have breaking news on a major problem for thousands of Americans and other travelers trying to enter the United States. The computer system for Customs and Border Protection has crashed at some major airports. Our aviation correspondent, Renee Marsh, is here in the Situation Room. What are you learning, Renee?
Well, I can tell you it's a nightmare situation for these international travelers at various airports throughout the country. Again, this Customs and Border Protection computer network, it is out at several airports. It's affecting arriving international customers. So they are unable to process them using these computers. They now have to do this manually. So important to note, operations have not ceased, but it is literally moving at a snail's pace at a time where traffic and volume is very high. Obviously, we're in the midst of summer travel. You're looking at video there. That is from Dulles Airport, and you can see just how long the line is there. No telling how long those people will be waiting. And then there's this other layer of this problem, which is missed connection. So I know that a lot of airlines are working to rebook these passengers. But the big question tonight is what caused this outage? We know this has happened to the agency before. They've experienced outages with their computer systems, and they've caused this sort of delay before. It happened in 2017. It happened in 2018. We know in 2017 it was a software glitch. Is that the same sort of situation that we're looking at here? We simply don't know. CBP saying that they are currently investigating the cause. But one thing is certain. If you are one of those international travelers, this is no fun. You're going to be waiting there for quite some time because, again, they are forced to do this all manually.
Those lines in Washington Dulles, incredible right
Yeah.
now. Renee, stay on top of this. We'll get back to you. Very disturbing development. Also tonight, a new twist in President Trump's efforts to punish two Democratic congresswomen. Israel has backed off its refusal to let one of the lawmakers into the country, citing humanitarian reasons. But Representative Rashida Tlaib is refusing to accept Israel's terms. And joining us now, Democratic presidential candidate Senator Cory Booker. He's a member of the Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. I want to get through a bunch of issues, but let me get your reaction. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib now says she won't be visiting Israel and the West Bank after Israel placed restrictions on her trip. She says, quote, visiting my grandmother under these oppressive conditions meant to humiliate me would break my grandmother's heart. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that she should make the decision that she believes is personally right for her. But I think the outrage here is the President of the United States. The language he uses to talk about two sitting Congress people, the lies that he tells that are so venal that they literally put their lives in jeopardy by whipping up the kind of hatred. And then for him to reach out for the Israeli government, have them change and capitulate to a president that pushes this kind of hate is just wrong as well. So this is an unfortunate situation, and again, just is another testimony to the moral vandalism of this president.
Like so many other members of Congress, the House and the Senate, you've called on the Israeli government to reverse its decision and allow these two congresswomen to come in. But why do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu reversed Israel's original decision and apparently gave into pressure from President Trump?
I mean, that's something that he'll have to answer to himself. What I know is that President Trump asked and he complied. And I think that was a capitulation of the values that I know the Israeli people speak to. It's a violation of the values that we speak to, that here are two great nations where we have a deep, deep relationship. And to deny two sitting Congress people elected by their constituencies and their communities entrance into the country is, to me, unacceptable. And on top of that, the way that President Trump is continuing to describe these women are patent lies, and they're dangerous lies because they appeal towards hatred. They appeal to the kind of violent sentiments that we see, unfortunately, too often in our country now, where white supremacists are using the words of this president to attack vulnerable populations.
Well, that gets me to the new plan you've unveiled to combat hate crimes and white supremacy. Your plan would require the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, to focus more on this threat. When you look at the Trump administration's approach to this issue, what are your biggest concerns?
Well, first of all, we're not talking in any way about a proportionate response to the problem. International terrorism seems to have motivated the spending of billions of dollars and it seems to have motivated a tremendous amount of bipartisan cooperation on this issue. But now we are, since 9/11, the majority of our terrorist attacks have been right-wing extremist groups, and the majority of them have been white supremacist actors. This is a major threat to national security, and this is the administration that even changed the categorization. It's no longer a violent white supremacy. They now have a amorphous category of racially violent extremism. And so this is an administration that won't even focus on the issue, won't even talk to its proportionate challenge to our nation's safety and security, and is not allocating the resources that they should. If I am president of the United States, I'm going to make sure, as we have have with other major threats, that we create a White House office on hate crimes and white supremacist violence to make sure that we are prioritizing what has now become a challenge and a threat to thousands and thousands of lives in our nation. This kind of violence is on the rise, and we need to have a president that will focus on it with strategies to actually solve this crisis in our country.
Senator, on the issue of gun control, another 2020 contender, Beto O'Rourke, just proposed a national gun registry and gun licensing system, a mandatory buyback of assault-style rifles. You say your plan, though, on gun control, in your words, is the most far-reaching plan of any other candidate. Can you still say that?
Well, first of all, I'm really happy that there are presidential candidates who first criticized my plan and now are turning to embrace it. The idea of gun licensing is something that I've talked about from the very beginning as a common sense strategy, one that has in states like Connecticut, where you need a license to drive a car. Connecticut said, hey, you should have a license to buy and own a firearm. It's common sense. And they saw violence in their state drop 40%, 15% less suicides. When I first came out with that part of my plan, I took criticism from folks that are now moving to support and embrace my plan. This isn't about politics. This is about truly what is a threat to our nation. In the last 50 years, more people have died to gun violence than who died in all of our wars from the Revolutionary War to present combined. We have a government that was formed in this nation, one of the fundamental reasons for the common defense. And this government now is failing to defend our country and is so capitulating to fear that we're literally now sending kids back to school and telling them, we can't protect you, so we're going to teach you how to shelter in place and how to hide. That's unacceptable. We need bold vision and plans to do common sense things that are evidence-based, like my plan that will reduce gun violence in our country and deal with this epidemic.
You addressed this crowd over at the Black Church PAC event where you are right now. In the new Fox poll, by the way, you're polling at around 6% among black voters. Joe Biden is at 37% among black voters. What's your plan to win over their support?
Well, if you and I been around long enough to know that polls this far out have never been actually predictive in our party since before Carter about who's going to become president. And even in the African-American community, you know, even Barack Obama this far out was polling behind then Senator Clinton in the African-American communities. Polls are not at this point what's important. What's important is what you're doing on the ground. And everybody from the Des Moines Register to even the New York Times of recent have taken note that we are building the best organizations in the early primary states. In Iowa, we lead all of the top 5 candidates combined in endorsements from state legislators and activists. We are building a organization to win. There are 6 months before Iowa even votes. We're a long way out, and I'm confident in our pathway. And as more people, record numbers now, are going to CoryBooker.com to be a part of this movement, I'm very excited that we're going to continue with our message of healing, bringing people together to beat Donald Trump. But that's not enough. That's the floor. But to get us to the ceiling of actually addressing the injustices and expanding the opportunity of America.
And I know you've qualified for the next Democratic presidential debate next month in Houston. Senator Booker, thanks so much for joining us.
No, well, thank you again for having me on.
Now, there's more breaking news just ahead. Corey Lewandowski sounds willing to testify in open session before the House impeachment probe. What might he reveal? Under oath in open session.
Well, he's serious about coming in, answering all the questions. That's a separate matter altogether. Look, he came before the House Intelligence Committee last year behind closed doors. Democrats had a lot of questions they wanted to ask about what happened, what he knew about what happened he didn't serve in the White House, but he had lots of conversations with the president, what he knew about the Comey firing. He would not talk about anything past the campaign season. And I'm told it got very tense. He swore at multiple Democratic lawmakers multiple times. We'll see if he does that publicly, because now the questions are going to be what was in the Mueller report, what he can reveal now. Will the White House start to intervene to prevent him from answering questions about what he talked to the president about? Those are major questions going forward, but I think that we can expect a very lively and contentious affair, assuming he does show.
Yeah, Rachel, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, Democrats are hoping he comes in. There are 125 Democrats in the House that now support impeachment, but obviously the public sentiment is not there. Most Americans do not want to oust the president. And so Democrats want to have these high-profile hearings, these sort of made-for-TV moments that will actually change public sentiment, or so they're hoping, after Robert Mueller wasn't able to do that. It was kind of a bomb hearing, a lot of them said, even privately. But, having Corey in, I'm skeptical it's going to happen because even if he comes in and says no obstruction, no collusion, they're going to ask him about what he told Robert Mueller. And he told Robert Mueller one of those 10 instances of potential obstruction of justice. And even just by relitigating that, even if he's like, oh, there was nothing wrong with this, he wasn't asking me to do anything illegal, just by confirming those details in the Mueller report, he's doing exactly what Democrats want him to do. And I don't think Trump is going to want him to be up here at all. So we'll see if he does.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. The Judiciary Committee's pretty busy right now. They're coming back into session a week earlier than scheduled in early September, a week before the recess is supposed to be over, to deal with gun control measures. But they can deal with it all they want, the Democratic majority, but it's the Republicans, especially in the Senate, that are going to determine the final outcome.
That's right. I mean, they have done some work over in the House, the Democrats there, in terms of universal background checks. That's a bill that hasn't been brought up on the Senate. You've heard the president talk about background checks in kind of an odd way. He'll talk about meaningful background checks. He'll talk about important background checks. He was asked yesterday about universal background checks, but it's a question that he doesn't really want to answer because he's clearly not on the same page with Democrats on this. I think we know where Republicans stand on this, even as you hear the president say, oh, Mitch McConnell seems to be for background checks. They're not for background checks. If anything, there's this red flag law or red flag proposal that's been brought up by Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, which would essentially incentivize states to pass red flag laws. Red flag laws would mean a judge can confiscate a weapon from somebody who's deemed unfit to have it. They already exist in 17 states. Democrats essentially say, listen, even if you have these sort of incentivizing red flag laws without universal background checks, they're kind of toothless. So I think, we're sort of status quo in terms of where this has been in the past. After Parkland, Donald Trump sounded very strong. There was a lot of, obviously, public outcry, Democrats and gun control groups asking lawmakers to do something. But I think we'll probably be in a stalemate in the way we have been before. At
the same time, Phil, as you know, lawmakers, they're also thinking about how to make domestic terrorism an actual punishable crime, which so far it's hard to believe it isn't, but there are challenges.
Yeah, let's go through this path. People in America would say today, if there were ISIS demonstrating on streets of America today, we should arrest them. That should never happen. ISIS is a group that has murdered people for political purposes. Go back to Charlottesville. If you were to say a white supremacist group involved in acts of violence can't demonstrate on the street across America, people would say, well, that's a free speech issue. They have a right to speak. Let me give you one question. Who do you want to investigate and why? I think the challenge the American citizens are going to have is they're going to say, this is great. We should be looking at white supremacists. And then somebody says, well, how about the group in your town? And an individual in that town says, well, that person has a right to speak. And they also have the right to say they hate somebody. Who do you want to investigate? I think the Congress and others are going to have a problem with that.
Yeah, they're already divided over this topic. There are talks right now about moving in separate legislation dealing with this. There's nowhere near a consensus on that. There's nowhere near a consensus on what to do about background checks. One, Senator Rick Scott, I talked to this afternoon. He, of course, senator from Florida. He was governor during Parkland. I asked him, would you get behind any background checks bill? Would you get behind the Manchin-Toomey background checks bill, which is narrower than what passed the House? He said, I'll look at everything. He would not commit to getting behind it. So the calculus may not have changed despite these two massive.
As we're speaking, Rachel, the president is tweeting on Rashida Tlaib and her decision not to go to see her elderly grandmother in the West Bank. This is what the president has just tweeted. Israel was very respectful and nice to Representative Rashida Tlaib, allowing her permission to visit her, quote, grandmother. As soon as she was granted permission, she grandstanded and loudly proclaimed she would not visit Israel. Could this possibly have been a setup? Israel acted appropriately. And then a couple minutes later, he tweeted this. Representative Tlaib wrote a letter to Israeli officials desperately wanting to visit her grandmother. Permission was quickly granted, whereupon Tlaib obnoxiously turned the approval down, a complete setup. The only real winner here is Tlaib's grandmother. She doesn't have to see her now.
Yeah, the reason Tlaib didn't go is because the Israeli government was making her sign a letter, a promise that she would not say certain things and she would not go to certain places. These are restrictions that have never before been put on a member of Congress who has visited the country of Israel. And that protest, using her grandmother as sort of a way to just sort of get her to do that as a critic of Israel, she just couldn't stand for per her office. Look, I'm talking to a lot of Democrats about this right now. A lot of Democrats spent the past few weeks, past few months actually trying to put distance between themselves, Rashida Tlaib and, Omar, in their criticism of Israel and trying to reassert the party's friendship with Israel and say, look, we are supporters of Israel. We have been there. And now they're in this weird position where they're having to sort of embrace these two women that they don't necessarily agree with on Israel policy and criticize a country that they have long been friends with. And so watching them sort of balance that has been really interesting. But a lot of them have been saying that Trump, if he really cared about the U.S. relationship with Israel, he wouldn't be making this a partisan.
Because you do hear a lot of Israel's best friends in Washington criticizing the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu, something you don't often hear.
I mean, AIPAC out, obviously no ally of Tlaib, and some of the statements she's made and her stance on Israel basically came out in saying Israel was wrong in this. Marco Rubio, also somebody who was critical of Israel's decision. I think in many ways the sort of well was poisoned when they said no to Rashida Tlaib after they had said she would be able to get into the country along with Omar, the president there, I think, leaning on his allyship and friendship with Benjamin Netanyahu, who, of course, is up for re-election in about a month, and in some ways is sort of running with Donald Trump on the ticket, right? I mean, this is somebody who he's sort of selling his friendship to voters in Israel as a positive. So you had the prime minister there essentially siding with the president in this political fight.
Phil, what do you think?
You have got to be kidding me. It's more difficult for a U.S. congressman to visit an ally than it is for me, a U.S. citizen. You've got to be kidding me. The other thing I'd say is the president just put Netanyahu, and Netanyahu's brilliant, but he didn't figure this out fast enough, in an impossible position. Since the beginning of the establishment of the State of Israel, America has said we're with the Israelis. And now it's, if you're Democrat, maybe you have suspicions about Israel. If you're Republican, you support him. The president is making Israel a partisan issue. That is horrible for the State of Israel.
It certainly is. All right, everybody stand by. There's more news. We're following President Trump's apparent dream of making an epic real estate deal on behalf of the United States is being met with eye-rolling and outright laughs. Even if he's serious about potentially buying Greenland, the owner of the world's largest island is making it abundantly clear it is not for sale. CNN's Tom Foreman is joining us right now. Tom, the idea of the United States buying Greenland is getting a lot of reaction.
Yeah, it has rolled across the Atlantic like a political tidal wave, and it's being met with howling outrage. Completely insane. He's gone crazy. No, thank you. The uproar in Greenland over the whole idea that President Trump thinks maybe the United States should buy the world's largest island has been swift and strong. I can only laugh. He's lost his marbles. The White House is not saying if this is a serious proposal, and the Wall Street Journal, which broke the story, says, well,
it's definitely real in the sense that he's talked about it a lot, and it's something that's definitely on his mind. As far as how real, I mean, it's not just how real, it's can he actually do it? The answer is probably no.
No, because despite Trump's boast about his business skills...
Anybody read The Art of the Deal in this room? Yes.
Greenland is owned by Denmark and home to 55,000 people, whose autonomous government has tweeted, Greenland is rich in valuable resources such as minerals, the purest water and ice, fish stocks, seafood, renewable energy, and is a new frontier for adventure tourism. We're open for business, not for sale. But why does Greenland, which is 80% covered with ice, matter anyway? That's a clue. Greenland is a gateway to the Arctic, and as global warming opens the region to more exploration and traffic, a lot of countries are showing interest, including China and Russia. The U.S. already has its biggest northernmost military base there.
It's located 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle, which remains a critical area of the globe in terms of our ability to thwart and defend against particularly Russian threats.
And history suggests this truly may not be a crazy idea. In 1867, the U.S. bought another huge cold place, which was mocked as a folly. But Alaska has worked out pretty well for American interest, and 2 times before, U.S. officials have raised the notion of buying Greenland. Still, the outlook for this real estate deal is not promising. It's not something you buy or sell. If countries want other territories, it's war. Close White House observers say they really don't think this is going to go anywhere, but next month the president is going to travel to Denmark to meet with the prime minister and the premier of Greenland. We just don't know, Wolf, if he'll take his checkbook.
Tom Foreman reporting for us. Thank you very much. We're also right now getting some new information about disturbing advances in Iran's missile program, and it's adding to concerns that some of America's most dangerous enemies and fiercest rivals feel emboldened since President Trump took office. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. What are you learning, Barbara?
Well, good evening. Well, some of America's most dangerous adversaries are making critical military advances as Donald Trump is in the White House. Tonight, new classified imagery shows Iran is preparing to launch a rocket as soon as next week that the Iranians claim could put a peaceful satellite into orbit, according to U.S. officials. But it's a program with the same technology needed for an intercontinental ballistic missile, the type that someday could strike the U.S. Commercial images of this launch site obtained by CNN show launch-related vehicles are already on site.
Iran. Trouble. Nothing but trouble.
Several U.S. defense and intelligence officials say Iran is improving range and accuracy of all its missiles. And so is North Korea. Kim Jong-un has conducted 6 short-range missile launches since May, several showing increased range. America's adversaries see a president now conciliatory at random times.
Our allies take advantage of us far greater than our enemies.
However, America's military adversaries are on the rise and bolder.
They believe that they can go ahead and produce weapons systems and test weapons with impunity.
President Trump compliments Kim.
I got a very beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un.
But U.S. intelligence experts tell CNN that Pyongyang continues improving all of its missiles and is trying to make new nuclear fuel supplies. Vladimir Putin is working on new weapons to keep the U.S. out of Europe, including a nuclear-powered missile that apparently recently exploded, releasing radioactive material. China has massive cyber espionage efforts to steal American military technology.
The reason we see all of these things happening in all of these different countries is because all of these rivals of the United States see no real pushback from the Trump administration.
The incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the president's personal military advisor, has a dire warning.
China went to school on us. They watched us very closely in the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. They watched our capabilities. They want to have the capability to defeat us by mid-century.
So when it comes to Iran and North Korea, how are they accomplishing all of this? Experts tell us they are very active in sanctions busting, and they also are active on the weapons black market. Wolf?
Exactly 50 years ago, nearly 500,000 people crowded onto a farm in upstate New York to celebrate sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Woodstock was the mother of all music festivals, and CNN has a new special report on its legacy. Bill Weir spoke with legends who performed that wild weekend, including David Crosby.
There was a cooperative spirit. There was a generosity to each other.
And how do you account for that? Was this just this cosmic fluke?
If I knew, I'd bottle it and sell it.
Yeah.
I'd give it away for free. If I could, I'd generate all of it there was and spread it around, rub it in my hair at night. It's going to be
But if the Woodstock documentary is any indication, the one guy who should know the secret recipe
Mike, what's the worst part of running one of these things?
is Michael Lang.
The worst part? What's the worst part about running one? I don't know. Huh?
Through biblical storms and bad acid trips,
Kids are hungry, you gotta feed them.
not enough food, and angry band managers, he was the impossibly young promoter holding it all together.
Where are you gonna go from here? I mean, you gonna do another one? If it works.
Okay, folks, we'll try to get this underway.
50 years later,
Hold on, hey, hold on.
he's determined to repeat his magic.
Bill is joining us now. The plan for a 2019 Woodstock concert didn't exactly pan out. What happened?
Yeah, you know, it was amazing, sort of mirror image to what happened in '69. Lawsuits and lost permits and just disaster after disaster. But the difference is There were $30 million on the line this time around for the likes of Jay-Z and Miley Cyrus. And in the end, they just couldn't find a home. There was no Max Yasgur left to miraculously give them a farm with a month to go to throw it together. And it's just one sort of little grace note to how we followed this. We went in search of just what was the spirit? What was it about this that we celebrate? Why is Woodstock the one that gets a golden anniversary? And to a person who was there, it's less about the music and it's more about the human connection and how people took care of each other in what should have been a humanitarian disaster.
50 years after Woodstock, Bill, what was its impact?
You know, it depends on who you ask, right? Some would say, well, those hippies all went and took showers and voted for Reagan and started new wars. And others would say, no, they planted the seeds of Barack Obama and the Me Too movement, the Green New Deal, Black Lives Matter, social justice movements as well. That's the beauty of this. It was one event, but 450,000 different stories as to how people interpret what went down there. But I found the one that moved me the most is the couple embracing in a blanket, a muddy blanket on the cover of the triple album. They're still together, lovers. They've been married 48 years. They found something at Woodstock I think we can all try to shoot for.
Well, good for them. Do the music festivals today still have the power to be as culturally momentous as Woodstock?
Well, it's now part of a $32 billion live music industrial complex. And I've been going to Bonnaroo for years. You got Lollapalooza and Coachella and all of these. And I just think with so many artists on so many different stages with so many messages, it's hard to capture that, you know, the way Country Joe sang an anti-Vietnam song back then. The audience today, they're less worried about getting drafted. They're more worried about getting shot at home. So, you know, artists like Childish Gambino or will rap about that in certain places. I've asked the kids if they think a song could still change the world for the better. They think so. But the grandparents thought the same thing 50 years ago.
Well, we're looking forward to watching your special report, Woodstock at 50. It airs tomorrow night at 9 Eastern, only here on CNN. Good work, Bill. Thanks for doing this. Aaron Burnett out front starts right now.